All right. Well, everyone, I'm really glad to be here with my friend Rob. We are new friends, but we've connected online in the comments on nerdy theological and spiritual topics for quite some time, philosophical topics. And we recently, he very kindly invited me to participate in an interview with David Bentley Hart, which is on his YouTube channel, and everyone should definitely check out. Um, yeah, and that was a lovely conversation, and so we decided we would chat ourselves and just see what comes out of it. So maybe Rob, I'll invite you to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about where you're coming from and what you're gonna want to talk about and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, so my name's Rob. My day job. I'm a therapist, a psychotherapist. A background in sort of psychodynamic therapy, but then I retrained as a CBT therapist, so I can sort of do both. Hence the title of my channel, which is Transcendent Psych, which is where I'm not really doing mental health stuff or advice or anything like that. It's just more my kind of moniker because it's that sort of interest, I guess, in the link between psychology, spiritual well-being, and I guess the divine and the theological and the spiritual, that realm, really. So, yeah, really narrow topic. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Justin. It's good to catch up a little bit more depth. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it for sure. And yeah, the idea of like where does our mind come from and how is it connected to the divine was something I'm hoping we're going to talk about and what's the relationship between our consciousness and the greater the greater consciousness, if there is one. I don't know where you're at with any of that, so we'll find out. But for me, our minds are emanations of the greater mind, which is the foundation of all things and the beginning of all things and the end of all things. Which in Christian language we would call Christ. And I don't know, I didn't even ask you if you're a Christian or not, and it's fine if you're not. It doesn't matter to me. But that's the kind of language I'll often use. You can use whatever language you like. But does that kind of, as a starting point, resonate with
Yeah.
where you'd
Yeah.
like to go?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there was probably a period of time where I to some extent, more distanced myself from that label. I think probably partly because it's got a lot of baggage for people, like, and it immediately, for a lot of people, sort of confines you to a stereotype of, you know, a certain demographic, perhaps. And I didn't really want to be boxed in that way because I will happily draw on, same as, not to put myself in the same league by any stretch of imagination, but same as David, in terms of we'll draw on things like, from Hindu thought and Indian philosophy and Buddhism and whatnot. But yeah, I'm happy with the attachment and the name, if you like. Yeah. So yeah,
There you go. And
yeah,
maybe I'll give you a quick bit of my background just because you probably don't
sure.
know it at all. And I have a very diverse sort of intra-spiritual background. So I grew up Quaker, an unprogrammed liberal rural Quaker meeting in southern Ontario with gray walls, and we sat in silence. I lived on a farm, an organic farm. We had a car and a TV, but some of my friends had horse and buggy, so it was kind of like different
Oh,
families would choose. Most people chose the car path, but I was around horses and lived on a farm and all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, I was also like a neo pagan Wiccan kind of thing. So my first
mm,
experiences leading religious gatherings were as a child with the friends from my Quaker's first day school. We would come together and try and do astral projection using Wiccan books that
oh,
we had bought online or whatever.
yeah.
Um, and then I also was involved in Indigenous ceremony quite a lot, and so I went to my first sweat when I was 12, and was very involved in ceremony throughout my entire 20s. Like I became an apprentice to an elder, and I attended multiple different kinds of ceremonies and helped as a helper at hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies, and became a firekeeper and all that stuff. And that was
Right.
really my path that I felt called to. And then through a story that maybe will come out later or maybe we don't need today, I found my way into Christianity. but it wasn't like I realized Jesus is my savior and so I became a Christian is the truth. I know that's the story you're supposed to tell, but it was actually that I just found a new path. I felt like the spirits in the tradition I was, which I would call angels now, but that the spirits were leading me and telling me to become a preacher and a Christian, so I did, and so I'm here on their beck and call, and now of course Jesus is as well, because I don't do anything half-assed. But yeah, so a little bit of background there. Use whatever language you want. Find any sources that are helpful for you.
That's really interesting. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. Age 12, you were sort of taken under the wing of elder. You said this is something that's not so well known in the UK, I think. So probably North American context, people might understand
Yeah. Yeah,
more
just to
what you mean. Yeah.
clarify, I went
So
to my
yeah.
first sweat when I was 12, but I didn't become an apprentice till my 20s. Um,
Ah,
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I attended
What's
as a
that?
child and a
I,
teenager as just an attendance, like you would be going to church
yeah.
rather than becoming a deacon or something kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And with that sort of a sweat. So I think I've got a picture in my mind of people in a sort of roundhouse and we're sort
Yep.
of what I'm making tons of guesses. What's the sort of what's the process and what's the sort of aim? What's that about in the thinking?
Yeah, there's I mean, you could talk for hours about it, and some of it would be inappropriate to talk about on a recording in public, like how the ceremony is run. I wouldn't
Okay.
talk about that, but the purpose of it and some of the symbolism, you can talk about those things.
Yeah.
And the reason for the secrecy isn't just so everybody knows any kind of badness that's happening. That's our culture thinks of secrecy and associates it with conspiracy and mischief. But it's actually a way to protect what is sacred, and not just to protect it from people, but to nurture and encourage the sacred potential of the ceremony. Because when it becomes sort of cheapened in casual conversation, it loses its potency.
Mm.
The medicine, that's what you would say, medicine in the Ojibwe tradition is like potency, spiritual power. And so the medicine of a ceremony is stronger when it's kept secret how it's done. And you learn it when you're there. It's not a secret from you when you come, but
Yeah.
you would learn it there. So, but the purpose of it is a purification, very much. So sweat lodges are a purification. They call it the womb of Mother Earth, and so you crawl back into the womb of your mother to be healed and to do all kinds of things. It's a very open, charismatic kind of thing inside. So there's singing, there's praying, there's healing, there's all kinds of different stuff that might go on depending on the context and the people. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me what you said almost there of in the positive sense of secrecy of almost like the Oracle Delphi the sort of rites. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, no, it's very different,
Yeah.
but I wonder if there are overlaps as well in terms of keeping gatekeeping certain things and
Yeah, I think so. There's certainly a way that it can be bad, right? Like that's, I think we all know that, and that's our cultural starting place. And so acknowledging that's important, that gatekeeping in and of itself isn't necessarily a good thing. But that there is a certain, well, one of the things that is very different that I have had to adjust to in the Christian world, especially in the modern expression of it, not so much in the church fathers and the writings of the ancient church, but this idea that like God does everything and you don't do anything. That's
Mhm.
this very important Christian idea, and it's not an Ojibwe idea at all. I've actually had elders tell me many times, don't expect God to do all the work for you. You've got to smarten up and try harder. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Pray longer, fast longer, sweat harder, do
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
um, and so that's one of the differences there. I don't remember why I was saying that, but anyway.
Yeah. So that was your background.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, so what, y- so you said that there was something around the kind of, um, in your 20s, that sort of, well, actually, probably sounds like more recently, actually, the shift towards, you felt like you were being sort of guided in towards sort of Christian direction. Um, yeah, what did that kind of look like
Yeah,
in
sure.
terms of, because obviously I'm aware that you're, sort of intellectually, kind of it sounds like an intellectual journey as well as a sort of a spiritual or an
Mhm.
experiential or phenomenological journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, I wonder if there's some dots there that would be interesting to hear about to join up.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the latter, what I've found in Christianity that I've loved so much is the philosophy and the centuries and millennia of thought that goes back right to the classical world, and I'm perfectly fine with that, and the illusion mysteries and whatever else it might have been. Um, and so I love that lineage of philosophy because I started with Eriugena. I was interested in Celtic Christianity because on the surface it sounded like a way I could be Christian and still understand my ceremony life. When you dig into it, of course, there's a lot of different versions of Celtic Christianity out there, and some of them are one thing and some of them are another. But a lot of people talked about Eriugena, so I wanted to go to the sources. So I just went straight to John Scotus Eriugena and started reading Paraphysian, which didn't make any sense at all. And I trudged my way through it, and I made myself read this abridged version. Was the only version I could find at first. Now I have the full one. Until finally the metaphysical language, the Neoplatonic metaphysical language, started to click in my brain, and I started to be able to see what he was talking about. It took a long time, and and that changed the way I think, changed the way I understand the world. It changed the way I understand myself and others. It gave me a rational framework in which to understand my experiential life and my prayer life, which I think is important because it's really easy to
Mm.
go off in a charismatic churches in a Christian context can be the best and the worst, right? Just like homeschooling, right? It's either sometimes homeschooling is the best thing that ever happened to a kid if you've got a parent who is a university professor and another one who's a whatever, and you get this great education. But it could also go sour without some supervision and some guidance and all that. So I like the structure and the framework of Christianity and the story, the Gospels speak to me,
Yeah.
on a spiritual level. But the intellectually, it's more the Neoplatonic metaphysics that's captivated me. But
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say the same thing. I was yeah. What was his Lloyd Gerson, isn't it? The book on Plotinus I was reading that they're very I go through phases 'cause sometimes these books are very dry and heavy, aren't they? And um but occasionally I'll just come across something like Eric Pearl or someone like that, you'd be like, wow, yeah, yeah, that's really just but I don't know if that's that part of me that's the sort of the categorizer and the organizer that likes to kind of unify everything into a grand theory of everything. Um, it was interesting actually in the interview, wasn't it, with David, where because there was the question around, so we're all monists in the discussion, um, and yet we evidently live in a world of plurality, um, on whatever metaphysics or ontology you're starting with. If you how do you go from oneness to multiplicity? What's there's got
yeah,
to be some desiring there in the oneness to do that. And yeah, just trying to sort of that's been part of my quest in the sense of, but the danger is, of course, you sort of uh, it's happened within naturalism, but we can end up in a sense getting into a kind of reductionism, um, which flattens out the plurality into
yeah,
a monody. I don't know what the word is. Um, but also then just a simple plurality isn't particularly coherent either, and it fragments everything into just decoheres, and yeah, it just becomes you lose sort of sense of meaning and things. But that's sort of a challenge in a way, isn't it, to how to I guess philosophically, but also psychologically and in our own lives. It's like, how do you hold together how much do I have to have it all together and integrated? How much do I have to flatten out the kind of bizarre cognitive dissonances that I have and the different personality aspects of myself? And it can work at different levels, but yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, the question of the one and the many. I liked what David said. It was something I hadn't thought about before. when you asked him. He said we can go from the many to the one logically, and say based on what we know of the many and experience and observe, we can logically deduce our way up to the necessity of the one. But if we start from the one, there's no logical necessity as to why there would be a many. And he just sort of admitted that. And I thought that was a really interesting starting place.
Yeah.
I think he's speaking more in terms of like logical proofs philosophically rather than, I think we could have a little more artistic thought about it and still maybe come up with some ideas. But it
Yeah.
is an interesting starting place to say that, like, yeah, we start here and we look up metaphorically, of course, and we see the unity of all things as a necessity for this contingent reality, which just require everything that exists requires a reason to exist, and that just leads it's turtles all the way down, and I can't wrap my head around turtles all the way down unless there's something behind the turtles making them all turtle, because why are they turtling if there's nothing behind them? But
Well, just coined the new term in metaphysics, turtling lie. Yeah. I
so
mean, he was
yeah.
also, yeah, go, yeah, go.
Oh, I was just going to say that Eriugena has this great way of talking about it. You're talking about how a lot of the Neoplatonic metaphysicians are really dry and hard to read, and sometimes Eriugena is like that for sure. But he's also a poet and has all this beautiful symbolic language to describe things. And so he uses the Garden of Eden as a symbol, and symbol in the fullest sense, as in something that connects us to a spiritual reality, not something that is a mere sign that's been made up like a stop sign, but a symbol as an interface into a spiritual reality with which we can interact with angelic realms, or in the case of the Garden of Eden, he would say human nature. And so the Garden of Eden is a symbol by which we can understand and grow and tend to our garden through the symbol and the use of the symbol. So that's just some background. And then in Genesis 2, there's this one little text that says there's a spring that comes up from the center of the garden, and it divides in four directions, and they have names, and there's stones that are associated with them and all this stuff. And then Eriugena expands from that, and he says that these rivers are the multiplicity, and the spring from which they arise is the unity, the place of the Holy Spirit emerging within our uniqueness, and then the rivers come out to form our individual consciousness, and that these rivers exist in the microcosm within us to give us as the structure of our consciousness, and also exist in the macrocosm, giving structure and order to all things, the consciousness in all things, as I think we're on the same page with there anyway, I imagine. But
Yeah, that's great. That's like so you've got that sort of language of sort of overflowing or superfluity in a way, which is always how I imagine, like if you were going to that starting point of the one, because it can't be any kind of idea of creation in a sense if you've got a kind of, I don't know, the one must, in my mind, be sort of all self-sufficient in it because it's not a contingency itself, so it can't be needing anything external. Well, there is nothing external to itself, so any sort of emanations, to use the sort of Neoplatonic language, must be by, wouldn't even necessarily say choice, because that's kind of implies sort of temporal cognitive thought in a way, but a sort of uh, it's not forced out of any other external thing external to itself, but it is its own nature to flow out.
yeah, it is. I agree with that, and that's the classical image of this sort of emanation, which I agree with. But I like the symbol of concentric circles a little better, because I find when I'm thinking using the spatial metaphor of a fountain, I'm like, well, what is it fountaining into?
Yeah,
Right? What is the space in which this emanation is coming into, and why is that? What is that? And Eriugena would say that there can nothingness in the sense of privation can never be the cause, the primary cause of anything. So there can't be a nothingness in which God has created, into which we have emanated. All of our emanation is actually within God, because there can't be. If there was a nothing outside of God, that would make a duality, and God would no longer be the oneness, right? There would have to be a oneness that defines what is and what isn't.
Yeah.
And so Eriugena often refers to God as the source of all that is and is not. And so the distinction between what has being and what does not have being comes from God. And therefore, God is more than being, beyond being, not being. God is not being itself in my mind or Eriugena's mind.
Yeah.
Um, and I think also in David's mind, the way he described it, but though I have to try and keep up with him. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that nothingness of no thingness, the no
Mm.
thing of God, is the ineffable source from which all things come. And we know, like we said with David mentioning, we can rationalize that there must be some source from which all things have come, and it must not be a being among beings, otherwise it's trapped in the turtle problem.
Yeah.
And so it has to, by definition, be, as you said, non-contingent and all of that. But I like to think that the contingent is carried within the non-contingent, is an aspect of the non-contingent, rather than something which has emerged from it, like separately. It's just
Right.
part of what it means to be the infinite expanse of all possibility, is that within that is Earth, and who knows, maybe a million other universes. I have no idea. What's in God? Who knows? We can only see what God has put down, with the metaphor, of course, down to us, if that makes sense. But
It made me I'm jotting as I go because there's loads of rich stuff you're coming out with, and I'm thinking we must go back to that. But yeah, I'm thinking of like uh, you know some sort of Lurianic Kabbalism with
mm,
you've got that idea of Zim Zum of the idea being that yeah, God can't create out of there's nothing out there. As like God is here, and then there's a whole bunch of nothing, which is a contradiction,
yeah,
Lawrence Krauss put aside. Um, that in a sense there is only God, but in order to create, the thinking is that God sort of has a contraction within God's self,
yes, yes,
a withdrawal of God from within God. So you create a kind of void. I mean, we're talking in spatial and hour terms for something beyond.
mm,
So, um, and then refills into that um, the kind of emanations of what is created.
mm,
Um, a metaphor I wondered about this, but I don't think David quite got there. Probably because I chucked a whole load of aim at once. But um, there's a rabbi, philosopher called Dr. Sam Labans, who uses the analogy of an author. Well, in fact, did we get there a little bit actually? Like an author and a book, or maybe an author and a film might be better. And he sort of says, that there are different levels of reality. So you could say like we're characters, you and I, within the story that is being written.
mm,
And there are things that are true within at the story level. So he starts off, Sam Levin starts off this lecture. It's really quite well. He says, so if you were to sort of say to Sherlock Holmes, do you actually live at 21B Baker Street in London? Because the house doesn't actually exist. Uh, um, is that true? And he said, well, of course it is. That's where I live. That's true. And so in the story, that's true.
mm,
But if we step out the side the story and we ask Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, okay, well, is there an actual house called 21 Baker Street? And he's like, well, no, of course not. But it's true in the story, but not true outside the story. That God can, if you like, this metaphor is of everything existing within a mind space,
mm,
um, including physicality in a sense, as emanating out of an idea or mental structure. And I was kind of trying to go there a little bit with David around the problem of evil, for example. So Sam Labans talks about this a bit. So we might ask about the writer of the Clockwork Orange. So you've got like, these guys being really quite deliberately sadistic.
mm,
Um, so does that make, I can't remember who the writer was now, but does that make the writer of the Clockwork Orange sadistic? Well, no, because it's a fiction, it's a story, but then are we then saying the evils of this world at our level, we're within this storied reality, that evil is then not real? It's just a fiction. Of course, then all the goods are kind of not real as well. Everything is
Yeah.
not real from the divine point of view. Um, and I don't think David would want to go that route, that he would say, actually, no, he wouldn't be anti-realist in a sense. We had a bit of that discussion, didn't we? That evil is a kind of like a black hole. It is a privation of the good, but it has a kind of gravity to it. But I wondered about that for a bit, whether that almost those kind of metaphors are, in a sense, a kind of, I know David would hate this, but a kind of theodicy, because if you have a mental reality that's a sub-reality, like a dream,
Hmm.
um, there is no harm done at the end of the day. Everything returns back to the one. As Paul's language, God shall be all things, all in all. But then you're left with, okay, what was that all about? Um, so yeah, sorry, I chucked a load of stuff at you there. I don't know quite where I spurred off from, but yeah,
Doesn't matter to me.
being a non-being, wasn't it? I think, yeah.
Yeah, as long as we land on interesting topics, it doesn't matter if we remember why we're saying the things we're saying. Because I certainly won't. That's not my gift. My gift is to remember what all the old books say. I'm really good at that. But what I'm saying, I have no clue. But I had a million thoughts come up when you were talking about that, and I'm having trouble choosing
Mm,
which direction to go with it because there's so much rich things to think about. One, this idea of the reabsorption into the one, and your metaphor of an author writing a book, because that's one area Eugenia uses as well, though he uses it a little differently that might be helpful. And I get into trouble. I'm going to preface myself. This is where I'm just going to come out as a heretic, and I'm going to say that I get into a lot of trouble in my Christian theology circles for saying that I think God either creates or allows evil, and I don't think the distinction between creating and allowing evil is nearly as distinct as people want it to be, and it's kind of a convenient way to excuse God. Well, God doesn't create; He just allows it. It's like, what does that mean?
but must
Um,
know ahead of time.
what's that? Sorry.
But must know ahead of time, if you like. Um, this is going to
Yeah.
be part and parcel of
Yeah, God
the
knows how it's all going to unfold, right? Like,
right.
did God not know that Adam was going to eat the apple? Well, that's a different God than we know of and talk about. If God doesn't know Adam's going to eat the apple. So, I'm going to like step way out back a little bit. He's got this idea about how creation is eternal, which I think resonates a lot with block time theory and what I understand of relativity. Not that I know any math at all, so I've just listened to mathematicians talk about it and then internalized it into my reading of Eugenia. But this idea that all of time exists simultaneously, the present moment is, depending on who you ask, it's illusory, it's subjective, it's you know, those are the two that I can think of. I like subjective better than illusory because I don't think illusory makes a lot of sense when you really pin it down. Like, who's having the illusion, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I would say that the present moment is not illusory, but it is subjective. There are multiple present moments, and my experience of this one is this one, and I feel it in this one because this is the one I'm in. But that all of the moments of Justin's life, and I want to clarify, when I say my past life, I don't mean like reincarnation. I just mean like my childhood. In my past life, all still exists. Those present moments still exist, and all my future moments exist in this block time theory. And the way Eugenia describes it, he says, think of God as an author writing a book, and when you write on the page, the thoughts of God become static on the page. They become reality as we perceive it, linear, one after another, all of that. But they don't leave God's mind. They still exist primarily in God's mind. The author is still where the universe exists. The book
Mm,
is a set of signs,
right. Right.
right?
Okay.
Which allows us to awaken the universe that has been created in mind. But the universe doesn't exist in the book. The universe exists in mind. And so creation has a temporal expression, but its true reality is eternal in the mind of God and transcendent of time and all of reality from the moment of the beginning to the end, the alpha to the omega, was all created at once outside of time at the moment that the son was born from the father, to use Eugen's language, the moment that the mind of Christ came forward, and the mind of Christ then is this whole universal mind. So I'm not sure how much that landed or made sense. So I'm going to let you talk because I'm not sure
No,
where I'm going next. But
that's really good because gave me sort of resonances of Plato's cave
mm,
in a way, it's a shadow
mm,
of like the book in a sense would be like the shadow version of the reality is in the mind of the author.
mm. Yeah,
Um,
and in the mind, it's all one. That goes back to that kind of one and many question, right? So
yeah,
in our minds, we can't say, well, okay, here's my thought about this character, and it's over there. Like a mind is just an amorphous, unified slash divisive, multiple slash nobody understands it, thing,
yeah, yeah,
which is very different from the page, which is the linear. You can tell what happened in the author's mind. The past can change of the story, right?
mm,
Oh yeah, that's not what happened. It turns out John did marry Sally in the end. And then blah blah blah. The story goes on, and it's all always been that way for God. But on the page, you can say no, it happened like this, it happened like that. Um,
yeah, yeah.
and so I would say that all of time always exists in God, and so when we return to the one, it's about a participation in the one, and a remembrance, a recollection of the one, rather than it is an obliteration of the many, because the many is always part of the one, right?
Yeah.
The one is all things, and so it includes the many.
That's really. Have you come across Don Hoffman?
I'm terrible with. I've never read any modern philosophers. Is the truth. I only read the ancient ones.
No,
I'm weird. So I've heard of Eric Pearl you mentioned, but I haven't read any of the other names. But
no, he's worth looking at. So he's a cognitive scientist at I think MIT um, in California, I think it is somewhere. And I disagree with him at some levels, especially more in line with David around realism. He's written books like I can't remember the title now, but kind of along the lines of why evolution sets us up basically not to be able to see the truth. David refers to to a few of these people in All Things Are Full of Gods, because Hoffman and Kastrup as well uses this language of our perception of reality as a kind of user interface. So you remember if in the book, like Psyche gets kind of annoyed at that term, um, because I guess David would see it as a sort of stuck behind Kant's noumenon and phenomenon
Yeah,
problem.
and then you end up with that like infinite regression of the homunculus in the mind. Like if your mind is in there pushing all the buttons, how
Yeah.
does that mind choose which buttons to push? Is there a mind pushing the mind inside you that's pushing those buttons, and you end up with a little man and a little man, and it's still just an infinite regression of no and no answer. But
Well, yeah, I mean, Don Hoffman sort of says, well, when they run when they run the maths, this is where this is like hiding behind. I don't know what I'm talking about really, but he seems to. When they kind of run out the probabilities using game theory and on Darwinist evolution, says the probabilities that we see reality as it is are virtually zero. Um, there are critics of him, both philosophers and scientists, that would say, well, then how do you know your theory is true then? Because
yeah,
you've just created a self-refuting loop. Um, so, so I think that's something he needs to address. But one of the things he uses quite a lot is he talks about, there is infinite mind. The one, he borrows that language from Plotinus, um, which is consciousness itself, and it seems to be kind of trying on these different headsets, like in you and me, and in different species and animals and creatures. That it's kind of, I'll try being like this for a time because the infinite mind cannot know itself. um, except through a gradual and an infinite process, I would imagine, of finite chopping off of the experiences of trying it from an infinite number of angles or perspectives. Um, so that might be something just to think about. Just to give another analogy on that, which I found interesting. So a guy called Rupert Spira, I never know quite how to pronounce. He's a non-dual teacher. Um, and he's kind of along similar lines to Don Hoffman. He's Advaita Vedanta kind of ballpark
Mhm.
of thinking. And he says, well, imagine if like this discussion we're having now, we took a photo. There we go. We've got a photo of that. And then we take a photo of this conversation from a slightly other angle. We've got a photo of that one. And we overlay them. And then we've got a photo from this angle and this angle. And the more angles and perspectives we layer on top of each other, the less clear it becomes what it is. It gets blurrier and blurrier. He says, and then carry that on to infinity. You've got just a blank.
Mhm.
So in this says like infinity cannot know anything in that sense. So because you've got just infinite perspectives. And so his suggestion, or Don Hoffman's suggestion at least, would be this is what's going on. This is why the one is doing multiplicity. In a sense, it's to know itself in infinite varieties, maybe in infinite universities, infinite universes. Um, or the author, to come back to our metaphor of the author, maybe it's the writer. And I mean, writers, in a sense, they don't, they sort of say that research is me search, that perhaps writers and artists and filmmakers, etc., are really it's exploring who they are as well as much as the world. But I mean, all analogies have their limits, and those analogies will run into problems. But yeah, I'll shut up for a bit and let you jump in.
Yeah, well, it made me think of something the last time I couldn't decide what to say that I chose not to, which is about God separating things in the beginning and the importance of distinction between things as a way of affording knowledge. So Eriugena agrees with you, at least in my reading of him. I'm not an authority or anything. Um, but he says that God does not know God's self. God doesn't know himself because there's nothing to know. It's not because is beyond God's knowledge. Nothing is beyond God's knowledge, but it's because
Right.
there is nothing to know because God is no thing. God is nothing. God is the ineffable source of all things. And so, you know,
Yeah.
what is ineffable cannot be known. That's the that's what it
Yeah.
means. And so he says God does not know God's self, but God knows us fully and completely and in every way throughout all of time and before and after time, which is the same thing. And so in Genesis, I'm rambling now, I'm not sure. In
Yes.
Genesis, though, you see this, God creates by separating, right? So he separates the light from the darkness. Now, all of a sudden, there's two things there's light and there's darkness. Before then, it's hard to imagine what light and darkness were before they were separated, right? Like what was that? That light slash darkness, that mix of opposites that didn't contradict each other and were one. And so Eriugena, following in Genesis 1, he pulls apart the first few sentences into like several hundred pages. He says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," and so "in" tells us the very first word tells us that creation happened within something, and that something is the beginning of all things in Christ. And so in Christ, God created all things, the heavens and the earth. And so that means also that God is not in heaven, right? Heaven is a creation of God within Christ. It's in my understanding the mind of Christ, and then the material reality is the body of Christ. And I probably am some kind of Trinitarian heretic because I think the Son is less than the Father. By just by definition, I mean that's like even the metaphor son and father, one's smaller and one's bigger, and and so for me the distinction between the father and the son, or in my Trinitarian language I say the mother and the son, because the ineffable, who we could say the dust bunny and the sun, it wouldn't matter, it's all wrong, but the difference between them is that the mother is the ineffable source of all that is and all that is not is, is is beyond everything, beyond any distinction, beyond any knowledge, be it even her own. And then the Son is intelligible. The Son is knowable, and that's how Jesus presents himself in the Gospels. You know, the Father through me, right? No one comes to the Father except through me. And so I have kind of this panentheist view where the mother is the ineffable, transcendent God of the Neoplatonic world, and the Son is a pantheistic God,
Right.
in a sense, which can't be real without a transcendent God, but could be real within a transcendent God, I
Yeah.
think. And then you have mind at large or whatever. I don't know if that's the right term. I know that's a Castrop term. I think I watch videos and I don't read books, so I try to remember things. But and then I would say that within Christ's mind, within heaven, right, which is the mind of Christ, there are angels, which are thoughts, which, and so you're having this constant movement from the unity into the multiplicity, and all of the multiplicity happens within Christ as Christ, in my understanding. That we all are the manifestation of Christ. Everything we see and touch, and even everything we can't see and touch. That's what Paul says. Everything visible and invisible, above and below the earth, heaven, hell, and earth. All of it exists in Christ. Um, and
Mm.
so for me, that's the concentric circles. You've got the big outside mother, then you've got the Son, and then you've got heaven and earth, which are the Son, and then you've got us in there, and like the angels dividing. And then within us, I think even our consciousness divides. It continues to multiply, and inside of us we have multitudes. And a lot of modern therapy practices like IFS and stuff like that are starting to pick up on the ancient understanding of that. The Desert Fathers, I'm rambling a lot now, but I want to quote Abba Poman because he's got this great little quote where one of these pithy sayings of the Desert Fathers. And so a monk, a well experienced monk, comes to Abba Poman, the great master, and he says, the demons attack me all the time, with thoughts of lust and anger and whatever it was he was trying to get rid of. And Abba Poman says, "You think the demons are harassing you? You're wrong. The demons only bother Moses and the prophets. They aren't concerned with little people like you. What you have is your own will has manifested into demons." I can't remember the exact way he says it. I'm going off the cuff, but he says your will has become the demons. Um, and that, you can just take that as a metaphor of like you're your own problem, bud, but you could also take it like metaphysically as a really important statement, which is that like little pieces of our mind are still mind. And so that's kind of the way I say it, like they're made of mind, and so they have agency, because that mind is agency for me. Free will and mind are like, it's just what is the same thing. And so our thoughts have their own agency. It's a lesser agency than ours, just as ours is a lesser agency than Christ's. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm going to let you talk
Yeah, no,
now.
you
But that's my emanationist, like all the rivers dividing into a million rivers. But
fractalization almost of.
yeah, prism I think is a really good analogy. You've got the one
Mm.
white light that goes through the prism and it becomes the rainbow. And the rainbow always existed in the white light, right?
Yeah,
It's not like it wasn't there before. It's just been revealed by the prism.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And that's kind of, and you're thinking that kind of you brought up IFS, like this acknowledgement of, and I like the way you said there's always mind within mind, like when we dream, we
mhm,
go off into another aspect of mind, and there are these, that's, I mean, just as an aside, Kastrup at one point talks about a study that was done in 2014, I think, of a woman that had dissociative identity disorder, because they used to doubt whether it was a real thing, whether it was kind of a part of suggestibility by
mhm,
medical people. So she would be, so I think she was blind, but they put her in an fMRI while she was in one alter, in one state, and then moved between alters, different personalities. And in the blind personality alter, the visual cortex went offline. And they're like, no, this is real. This is going on. This idea, and also what was fascinating was studies where they've done. I don't know if it was the same woman, but look at the alters would have the same dream as the other alters, but from their perspectives.
Mm,
So the same characters would appear in the dream, but seeing the movie from a different perspective.
mm,
But this idea that we are multiple selves. I mean, at a biological level, literally, we are, millions of, think of Michael Levin's work. I don't know if you've ever come across him, but you've got organized intelligences of all sorts of cells that then operate at a level of a unified being as well.
mm.
The cellular level, the organ level, and the whole body level. The idea that we wouldn't, at a psychological level, have this multiplicity within a unity would be kind of crazy. So, um, yeah, so that kind of brings me to that whole thing. What do you do with what is the task of flourishing as a human being? Is it make make come back to your garden metaphor, maybe, of like, is it about an integrated happy ecology of angels selves, these thoughts, within the one, or is it a domination and colonization, if you like, of all those that
Mm.
ecosystem by one? do
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I do.
Like
I do. I think,
one of the many within that, so we don't want to flatten out the many, and
yeah. No, it's a great question. I think it has to be both. It has to be both. And then we got to work out how that makes sense. That's how my starting place. Um, in the Christian language, Paul talks about putting on the mind of Christ, and then pouring ourselves out for this, and that kind of thing. And I'm going to just like pull a couple scriptures together because I need them all. And then Jesus says, "From the heart of the believer flow rivers of living water, which are the Holy Spirit."
Yeah.
And so, as the free will is flowing through us, like in Paul, he says right after he talks about the kenosis of Christ in Philippians 2 and the self-emptying and the mind of Christ. So he's talking about putting on the mind of Christ, and that's what the main thing I'm trying to get at here is that in your second one, is there sort of a dominating figure, and I think the mind of Christ can be that in a healthy sense of dominion, at least, and should be that in a healthy sense of dominion. And then we also have this sense in which we are the multiplicity, in which we have all of these parts which need to be cared for. And I think IFS has very roughly and needs a whole lot of fine tuning. And if I'm being vulnerable and personal, I had a really bad experience with IFS. Didn't help me at all.
Okay.
But I like the philosophy of it, and I think it needs some fine tuning. But they have this idea of self and parts, right? And I think in the Christian symbolic world, you would talk about that in terms of Christ and the disciples, Christ and the people he meets, Christ and the demons he excises, Christ and the angels who communicate with him, and all of those kinds of things. And so we have within us a unity. We have the mind of Christ, which is the unity of all of us, the higher mind, which I'm guessing would be the nous, since it's the unity, the one that allows us to connect with the one. Though I'm not a Greek guy. And then we also have the many, and there's a beautiful image from Aelred of Rivaux, who's a little bit of a philosopher, much more of a pastoral guy, but he says that we should look within ourselves. So he describes the prayer of recollection, where we collect ourselves and all our senses and faculties. So we close our eyes, we go somewhere quiet, we close off the windows of our senses, and then we gather our faculties, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, our emotions, all the different things, and we try and bring them all into a central place. And then he says, as a father beams upon his household, beam upon all of your thoughts and feelings that are within your home. And so you have a well-ordered house from the perspective of the father of the household. This is medieval language. So you can be the mother of the household, and that's just as good. And you've got all your kids underneath, right? And all of your other dependent adults and your pets and whatever. and you help them have an organized system. And sometimes that means a bit of dominance. Sometimes that means, look, anger, you got to shut up right now. Sometimes you just got to stuff your anger down, but not forever all the time, right? right. But there are moments where you need to have authority and say, look, I can't yell at the judge in this court case right now. I just have to shut up, or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So I like to think of it in terms of that kind of shepherding model. Is another one Aelred uses, of the shepherd and the flock. So we have our thoughts and feelings, which are our flock, and then we have the shepherd, which is the mind of Christ, which tries to organize and help it all and sees the big picture and loves them all and tends to them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I nearly went into it, but I didn't think it was the right place to do it when we did the interview with David. But I didn't. I did an interview with Heather a couple of years ago when her book Returning to Eden first came out. Um, and it was a. I'll just share, just see where this goes. I've no idea where this is going, but it's just interesting to me because you know, when you have a sort of an experience in prayer or meditation, and most of the time it's just ordinary. You know, life's just ordinary and whatnot. But and this wasn't like you know, I was taken into the seventh heaven or anything like that. But it just struck me. I was going through a bit of a phase of like, you know, well, I kind of want to deconstruct my faith a bit, you know, kind of really go down into all the different scholars and the historical Christ and do all that, you know, kind of let's really go into this big time and, you know, see what comes out the other side. Um, and I thought, but I'm going to use all my resources. I'm also going to draw on meditation and prayer as I do this as well. You know, and nothing's off the table. You know, let's bring it all onto the table. Um, and I just, it was almost like an Ignatian imaginative, or in Jungian terms, like an active imagination exercise in a way. But I sort of put myself into just sort of a quiet state, and then I pictured myself in a forest. I shared this with Heather, and this was a few days, may have been a couple of weeks before, I can't remember, but this was before I got to this point of the book where she talks about exactly the same thing. Um, and I found myself in this forest, and there was one path leading up towards a sort of sunset. It was sort of twilighty, going up towards the light, and another path going down into the dark. And I sort of looked off towards the dark, and then I see Christ standing down the dark path, which is kind of counterintuitive. It kind of feels right when you look back on it, actually. And he just sort of says, "Come." And I was like, "Okay." And I sort of head down there. Um, he disappears into this hole in the ground. So I'm like, okay. So I decide to, okay, follow down. So I go down into the ground, and inside, down below the ground, is this huge, dark basilica. I'm just in this huge underground basilica. And then right off in the distance, there's the where the altar is. There's this sort of lit golden cross in this dark basilica. And as I zoom in and more and zoom in more and more into the heart of Christ, and as I do that, I'm suddenly him looking back out the other way. And it was bizarre because then I got to the next section of Heather's book, and it was more or less not the exact words, but the exact same idea. She says, and the task is to realize that you get to the point where from his cross, Christ is looking out through you onto the world. Um, I don't know quite how that resonates, but it does sort of resonate to me with kind of things we were talking about and what you were saying there about kind of there is that sort of oneness rather than separateness. And I think a lot of spirituality, in a sense, trades on a separation anxiety. That's stuck with me quite strongly when I heard that before, someone saying that. Um, so it trades on a separation anxiety between sort of us and the divine. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting because in the Neoplatonic world, you have the real importance of eros, however you say it, the erotic love, which, for those who are listening, doesn't just mean sex. Erotic love in the ancient Greek world was the love that desires to be united with something, which is why sex is one good example of erotic love, but so is also a desire for a piece of cake. is also erotic love, and also so is a desire to be united with someone in a conversation, or to be united with God in spirit, to become one. And so in the Christian Neoplatonic language, and all Neoplatonic, but like in the Christian world, there's this emphasis in the monastic writings on cultivating this desire for God. So, like you're saying, the separation anxiety. And in some writers, you can see it almost as like a desperation, like a sort of like, I'm so weak and pathetic and pitiful, and I need God, and I wish I could be united with God, and realizing my own broken multiplicity will bring me to the unity.
Yeah.
But then you also have another kind of stream of it, which is more about cultivating the loving desire for the good and the beautiful. Um, and so in the Cloud of Unknowing and the later medieval mystics, you find that really well as in the original Dionysius and others like that, you find that as well. And so the idea is that it's a cultivation of loving desire rather than of a lacking desire, right? Because eros is certainly not anything other than a love, right? It's a love,
Mm, yeah,
and so you're longing like you would for a lover, not like you would for a savior. As shouldn't say that, but you
yeah,
know,
I know what you mean.
um, yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense because I remember really when I was reading. I didn't read. Just whisper it here. I didn't read the whole book yet. About the beginning bit of "You Are God" by David Bentley Hart. When he talks about that, and he talks about it in Into, didn't he? And in All Things Are Full of God, that all desires, in a sense, um, implicit within them is a further desiring of a final cause and the cui bono. What's this good for? I want the cake. I want to, the eros for the cake, but
Mhm.
well, it's also because I have the desire to for taste and for the sweetness, and
Mhm.
then well, there's a desire for happiness. I don't know if that's quite
Yeah.
what he meant exactly, but there is a sort of there's an ongoing desire enfolded within more
Mhm.
proximate desires. Um, where was I going with that? I've lost my train now.
I don't know, but I agree with it. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a Platonic idea and a good one that
Mm,
all people are acting out of a desire for the good, but they're confused about what is good, or they're confused about how to get what is good, or they're confused about something. But ignorance is the cause rather than maliciousness. And even those who find joy in hurting others are still seeking joy, and joy is a good thing. And so the ultimate goal is still for the good, even though they're acting and pursuing that good in a bad way, in a confused way. They don't know how to find joy properly, so they're finding joy improperly.
yeah.
And that is got brought into the Christian tradition for sure with the understanding of demons. And I think it ties really importantly into the question of our multiplicity, because I believe that we are created good as a whole. Our garden is well ordered when we are created, right? God made us as a functioning ecosystem that runs, and parts of that ecosystem, to use the IFS language, the parts can fall from grace. The angels, which are our thoughts, are the virtues that flow through us, the multiplicity of our divine mind, our divinity. I'm not sure what I'm saying anymore, but the angels are our thoughts, our multiplicity. And when an angel falls, then a part of our coherence is disrupted, and we fall into ignorance, and we don't see properly, and we get stuck in this sort of cycle of not being able to have proper perspectives, which create problems, which lowers our perspectives, and we get stuck in this ignorance of how to obtain what is good. But we're always desiring what is good. No one's sitting there thinking like, man, I wish I just felt like crap. And if you did think, I wish I felt like crap, it's because you like to feel like crap, which means that you don't feel like crap because you like it. Um, but
Yeah, it's just an unavoidable
yeah.
implicit desire for the good, isn't there, within
Mhm.
even however obscured
Yeah.
within all
Yeah.
of our
So I think
yeah.
that's really important for healing, because you're asking like, what do we do practically? And so for myself, when I go inward, like in ceremony, I was taught with fasting and all kinds of practices, how to go to the spirit world, and so that's the language that like I use for my inner garden.
Yeah.
An imaginal inner Jungian thing would work too. But when I go there, my goal is, as the mind of Christ, to heal demons, not to execute them, right? Because they have a rightful place in the ecosystem, and the ecosystem isn't going to function until they return to that. And so Christ is the great restorer, the great healer. And when you actually go through the Gospels and you think of all the times he kicks out all these demons, he never actually hurts them or does anything bad to them. And he usually actually gives them what they want. There's a great example of probably my favorite symbolic story of this is when Jesus meets the man who's filled with legion, the thousands of demons. And it seems like on the there's a sort of surface level reading of it that makes it seem one way, but if you stop and really pick apart the details of it, you realize what's going on in a much more detailed way with this kind of symbolic framework that the ancient world was filled with, and this text was written with in mind. I'm sure some version of it, not that I have the perfect version of it, but some symbolic language like this. And so Jesus approaches, he says, what is your name? So first of all, you have to identify what is the broken thought. What is the thought that's dysfunctional? What is the thought that's disordered? And the demon responds out of the man, my name is Legion, for we are many. Okay, so right away you have a multiplicity within a person, right? There are many demons in this man. There are many parts of him which are confused and disordered. The whole system is wrong. And so the demons immediately start to beg Jesus for mercy, which is interesting because he doesn't threaten them. He just asks them, who are you? And they say, please, Lord, don't hurt us. Please, 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 please. And so I think it reveals right away that the demons are hurting and that they are in need of help. And Jesus does not condemn them. They say, please don't hurt us, send us into the pigs. So the demons tell Jesus what they want, and all he does is send them into the pigs, gives them exactly what they ask for. It sounds like he's cursing them when it gets preached in church, but he doesn't. He gives them what they want. He approaches them, he asks them to identify themselves, he determines their need, he gives it to them, and then they take off and they go off and they drown in the sea, which you can interpret symbolically. I would say return to the oneness of the water, of the oneness of the sea. But that whole process, there's a whole psychological process going on, and in the book I'm working on, which I have to talk to Heather, we're working on setting up a thing, because my whole book is about returning to Eden and all of this symbolic stuff that we're talking about. But for me, I think, I've gone through every single story of Jesus encountering a demon or the devil in the Gospels, and if you read it with this psychological lens, it's deep and profound. Whereas when you read it on a literalist, fundamentalist level, it's idiotic and meaningless. Right? I'll just be frank. I'm like, why do I care about this story if I'm supposed to read it as a literal, like, Jesus showed up and there was this dude and he was like, go into the pigs, and you're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
okay, but as a symbol, it's rich.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because like I'd never noticed that before, that sort of reading, that response of don't hurt us, that sort of immediately fearful response that we have towards the divine, really.
Yeah, and the divine mind. So
Mm.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I hope that's okay. But
No, no,
in my
no, no.
understanding of the
Yeah, yeah,
symbol, Christ represents in this symbol, not that the story didn't happen, because I think the whole life of Christ could be real and it can be a symbol. It's just for anyone who's watching.
yeah.
But so I'm not denying any of the accuracy of the Gospels. I'm just talking about the symbolic meaning of them. And so Christ is the mind of Christ, is us in our unified whole perspective, approaching our broken parts, our disordered parts, our dysfunctional parts. And the fear piece, I think it shows that not only ignorance, because fear comes with ignorance, right? Like when you don't know what's going on, you're scared, right? And that's and so the ignorance of evil is a fear, and so many people who do evil act out of fear, and there's a lot of, I remember listening to Richard Schwartz, the IFS guy, talk about his work in prisons with pedophiles, which it's like intense work. I won't go into details of it, but he said
Yeah.
that most of them, when you got down to it, were afraid that if they didn't act the way they did, that someone else would to them, or something like that. That there was some kind of obviously wrong thinking and not excusable, but some kind of at the root level a fear that was driving, all of this evil that was happening. And I think that the
Yeah.
demons being scared all the time of Jesus is like that. They know that when the mind of Christ returns, they will become ordered again, and they don't know that that's good because they think the other thing is good, and so they think they're being robbed of what's good, and they resist it.
Yeah, because if you think of like we come back to that point we were talking about a minute ago, that sort of you talked about the sort of the desire not being out of a lack, but out of a desire for what you a kind of return almost to what you a remembrance, I guess, almost to
Yeah,
what you have already. It's
yeah,
not a separation. A lot of evils, I suppose, it's a strong word, but yeah, we can use the word, it's a philosophical term, are from people, include ourselves in that, we cling on to things and get attached to things because we live in a mindset of a lack, and privation,
yeah.
and evil flourishes on a fear of me not having enough, so that I've got to make sure I take it off of you, or you don't take it off of me, or um, there's something more. There's a common thread here, which is maybe even more interesting. But this link between the sort of privation of the good and this sense that it's orientated around lack, and it's orientated around fear and loss of things, and whereas love isn't.
Mhm.
Love can let go because it knows that there'll be more in the giving, and it can be generous, and it can be. And most of our problems in the world are, between people and political systems and the rest of it are that mindset in some sense.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that's true. And I had the thread that you were mentioning came to me, and then now as I started talking, it left me again. I was like, "Oh, there's the thread," and now I've lost it. Um, but evil as privation, I'll start there because I just know how. Evil as privation makes sense to me in some ways, and also fails for me as a theodicy.
Yeah.
And so, for those who are watching, the idea is that anything that's bad is a corruption of something good. So basically, what I was saying, every angel is a fallen demon, and that it's a lack of a goodness, and it doesn't exist in and of itself. Evil doesn't have an ontological status. It doesn't have a place in the functioning of the universe. It's a disruption of the universe, a disruption of the functioning. And so I think on a pastoral psychological level, it's really good. On a theodicy level, I still think God has created both anyway. But
Well, and it comes in inevitably it emerges when you have finitude
Mhm.
and kind of emerging out of the one. And I guess it's reversed to some extent in as that as people return their finitude to the infinite, but
Mhm.
not with a sense of lack, but with a sense of, that I guess it's working towards resolution, not to erase the finitude and the manyness, but as it finds itself back within the fullness.
Yeah, I
So
like the remembering, the recollection idea in Platonism. Go ahead.
yeah, but what
Let's
is
just let
interesting, like
yeah.
at a psychological level as well, because if you think of like let's flesh this out in practical terms for like, let's say using the metaphor, if you like, of angels or demons for thoughts or parts of
Mhm.
the person at a psychological level, that taking that symbolism and in that way, but also recognizing, I think that language recognizes the almost livingness and agency of thoughts, that they're not just concepts, they have a force to them, an energy,
Yeah, yeah,
which I
and
think IFS gets to, which some therapies kind of abstract
yeah,
too much. But like if we were to think of that, like any when people are stuck and they can't solve things and they are um I don't know, when we're stuck, say, in ruminative thought in a depression, for example, that's almost always some element of not being able to see a broader
Hmm.
reality of ourselves or of life or the world. This is not to blame people. People get themselves all sorts of reasons into, because life happens
Yep.
to people, yeah, but at some level, the route out is a reconnection with a fuller. So rather than a lack and a
Hmm.
privation of truth and perception and vision of reality and of ourselves, and desiring again
Hmm.
as well. And not that sense of just living from lack, but being already okay enough and good
Hmm.
enough and emerging back into maybe I'm even more than good enough.
Hmm.
Those sorts of things accompany, let's say, recovery very often, don't they? Um,
Yeah, I think so for sure.
mm,
When Paul talks about putting on the mind of Christ, he goes on to say that Christ empties himself, um, and then is lifted up to the right hand of the Father. And sometimes people leave that part out, but that's the whole process of the mind of Christ, according to Paul, is we empty ourselves and then we are lifted up to the mind, to sit beside the right hand of the Father, which I think just means we come back into our wholeness. We've found our the mind of Christ. We found our psychological fullness. But there's a letting go and an emptying that has to happen first, and I think that's the exact opposite of trying to grasp, which is what Paul also says. Christ does not grasp at divinity, right? He doesn't grab it. He pours himself out of abundance, presumably. He empties himself to the point where he has nothing left. So I guess it's not enough of an abundance entirely, but in that faith of that is then lifted up to the right hand of the Father, and so
yeah.
like you're saying in that depression spiral, it's so much easier to see from the outside. And I can look back to recent times when I've been trapped in it and not been able to get out and needed someone I think we often need an external, and that's where the savior language is helpful. That when we're trapped in that spiral, we don't see the way out. Even if we can logically say like, oh, I know I need to exercise more, blah 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 blah, it just becomes a way to beat yourself up and blah 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 blah, and you're still stuck in the trap, right? And you kind of need someone else sometimes. Not that it's impossible to do it on your own, but it's way easier when somebody else comes in and says, hey, wait a minute, you don't got to do it like that. Like they don't have to say that, but they can just hang out with you and show you or whatever, and you can realize it. But to bring that other perspective, that wider vision, if we don't have anybody around us to do that, we still have Christ. We can still pray, and I think that prayer opens our perspective. Then we can empty ourselves, let go of all the things that we're holding on to, pour ourselves out in prayer, ask for what we need to be lifted up, and all of that process, whether you believe in the miracle of prayer or not. And I'm agnostic on that. um, I've experienced it and I logically don't understand it, and so I remain agnostic. But regardless of that, on a psychological level, I think that process opens our perspectives. All of a sudden, we're not looking at ourselves. We're looking at least at someone else who's going to maybe help us with ourselves. At least something outside that isn't this thing that just gets worse and worse. But
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah.
there's a lot of correlation between self-preoccupation and depression, and which is not to say that all depressed people are self-preoccupied, or that it's
Mm-hmm.
because they were self-preoccupied they got depressed. And a lot of very self-preoccupied people that aren't depressed, some of them in positions of great power. Um,
Yeah.
so the image I often think of, it becomes a bit of a black hole. You just more and more and more around this version of yourself. Um, and the path often is kind of like that, and like you say, sometimes you need someone else to help you. And actually, just that empathy I remember when I was doing my training, one of the videos we watched was of this kind of deer that had fallen into this hole, and he was just stuck there. And then someone comes along and goes, well, what you really need to do is this and you need to do that. And they're like, yeah, great, but I'm still stuck in this hole. And then along comes this kind of rabbit character and just climbs in the hole with him and just sits there next to him and just listens to him and hears that. And actually, then you know that you are held within another mind.
Mm-hmm.
And and so intrinsically your mind expands your perspective because you start to see yourself within the love with which that other person holds you.
Mm,
So you're held within a love, even if when you can't do it just in your own mind. And I guess we can expand that to a spiritual level as well. That
yeah,
but the fear, the demons, as it were, would be,
yep,
don't hurt us. But actually, when the experience would actually be like, "No, fear not,
yeah,
be at, be at peace. That would be a different response, and to learn that. Well, the one image that I the problem of evil is a really difficult problem, isn't it? And theodicy is like, I think you say, there's lots of good things that get argued here, and none of them quite pull it out of the pit type of thing. But there is something very powerful about it. For me, just looking at the cross, and even if we can't intellectually understand how it is that God could allow suffering in a world, that to go back to my meditation earlier, it's like, well, you are in me suffering, and I am in you. I'm there too
yeah.
in that suffering. There's a participation. It's not like what's the image? The separation image again of like the World War II generals kind of like, well, go and fight at the front then, and you go and suffer, and we're back here in our cozy deaths. It's like there's a deep participation
Mhm.
of a oneness which changes that. So yeah. Anyway, I waffled on.
No, no, it's good because it leads me to one of my favorite topics, which is an alternative understanding of the salvific process of the cross, which Eriugena gets from Maximus Confessor. I read it in Eriugena. I haven't read it in Maximus, but it's this beautiful idea where the idea of the microcosm. So I brought it up, that idea with David as well. The idea that the human nature includes within it the totality of all things. Eriugena says because we're both an angel and an animal, we have the capacity of angels to abstract and do angelic type. We understand mathematics and we can do all this angelic stuff, but we're also obviously animals, and so we include everything, and we are the microcosm of all things that exist, both heaven and earth. And so then when Jesus takes, when the Son of God, when the Logos takes human form, he assumes upon himself the entirety of all created things, both in heaven and in earth. And then when he dies with them. And when he resurrects, they are resurrected with him. And the restoration of all things is already present in all things. And for me, I think of there's that little bit in Revelation about how there is the Jesus, the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. And so I think of Jesus's, and again, I'll say for my critics that I'm imagining right now, and I'm teaching as a Christian, a historical death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, but that being an expression of a larger spiritual reality, manifest within time,
Yeah.
of an eternal spiritual reality, just like the mind of God, all the thoughts, the page of paper, like we wrote it, and that eternally from all time, death and resurrection is the pattern of creation, and it's the sort of foundation of who Christ is. And if I go back at least to my metaphysics, where I said that the Son of God is the pantheistic understanding of God, not panen, but pantheistic is the universe is this guy. When he dies, we all die. When he resurrects, we all resurrect. We're all him. He's all us. And of course, he's eternally being born from the mysterious mother that we can't say anything about. But yeah, so this idea that we can then participate in the resurrection, and we do all the time, and we see it in the changing of the seasons. That some of the medieval Celtic texts pick up on this theology, and they say everyone has known Christ since the beginning of time because they saw the changing of the seasons, they saw the death of the winter and the new life of the spring, and they knew the resurrection. And some people will say that, I don't know if you know Jesse Hake in the DBH group. He and I
Yeah.
had this big long debate and YouTube conversation about the
Okay.
atemporal fall, which I loved and is great. And so there's this idea that reality has fallen and it fell out of time, and I think that maybe that's true in a way, but the salvation has to be out of time as well. And so both the fall and the restoration, both the death and the resurrection are outside of time and outside of consequence, and they all exist and manifest within all things at all times. And I'm rambling a lot now, but there's an idea
It was like the
from
author
Ian
thing.
McGilchrist I want to throw in real quick, where
Yeah.
I was listening to him talk about contraries and the separation of things and how they don't have to be equal and they usually aren't. And he says he gives love and hate as an example. Love and hate are opposites. Hate cannot include love, but love can include hate.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful example to me, and so I think that that's also true of the death and resurrection, that they exist as contraries eternally in time, but one is greater than the other. The resurrection consumes death. Death doesn't ever consume the resurrection. um, I'm not sure
That's
if I'm making
really
any sense anymore, but that's the end of my ramble there.
that's really interesting. I like the asymmetry you mentioned there in a way
Yeah.
because like there's a sort of common memes, aren't there? Like hate crimes. We use it in a very low resolution fashion in our culture, and it's like, well, intrinsic to love would be to hate what is evil. So, there has to do any morality, you have to have hating. You have to be able to like this, approve of this, and hate that, don't you? It's just, you know. Um, but that's really interesting, that idea, because you've got there something Ian McKilk was like, so almost like the hating aspect. So love would be kind of, I don't know where I'm going with this. Let's just see. So love is like a sort of unifying, holding together, fullness type
Yeah.
thing.
That's how I understand love, the unifying
Yeah,
force. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And then hating is almost like a force of pulling apart, pushing away, distinguishing.
Hmm.
But you would need that, let's say, if you come back to that Zim Zum idea of, say, God contracting God's self to give rise to another order, that there has to be distinction within God, not necessarily separation. So we might not want to call it hate, but those having a dynamic where we can separate, like, I mean, like, I don't know, even in like close relationships, let's say, you have to have an ability to merge together and to be one, but not such that we are now so one and so joined at the hip, and that there's no love anymore, because it's just I am me, you. Do you know what I mean? So there has to be a capacity to be united, and to separate and push away, and pull together. I don't know. There's something there, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
waffling, but yeah,
Yeah, no, that resonates for sure. That's what I was trying to say as well. I think that you can't have one without the other. You can't have light without dark. You can have whatever it was that light and dark were together before they were separated, but you can't have light without dark, right? Um,
well,
uh,
I don't know. Like, I wonder.
but light's always more powerful than dark. You bring them together, the light always takes over.
Yeah,
But
but what is it more that, like, you could conceivably have just the good, let's say, or just the one,
mm.
like, as Plotinus relates the good and the one, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so I might waffle a bit there. I mean, and I get
Yeah.
into trouble in the DBH group for this. I had a whole bunch of people challenge me on it, and I tried to
Okay.
explain myself, and it didn't go over well. But I don't think God is good. I think God is beyond good, just like I don't think
Yeah.
God exists. I think God is beyond existence. If God was good, then God would have a definition. Then the apophatic sense of God would not be true. We would have a definition of God because good is something which is intelligible and definable.
Yeah.
I believe that goodness is an objective, intelligible reality, but therefore it cannot be God. It must be a creature of God, and it must be something which God has designed. And God has designed good in such a way that it contrasts with evil. That's just what we observe in the world. And so God, in my mind, then has created good and evil, but just in the same way as light and dark, a good can encompass and fulfill and make right what is evil, even though the evil can never take over the good and make it everything evil. Everything is always foundationally, the good is stronger even though the evil exists. And I think God placed the evil there on purpose so that we can grow, so that we can desire the good. If there was no evil, we could not desire the good. Um,
I think, yeah, and I'm almost thinking there of we're thinking almost like in terms of the idea of a category, because from the perhaps it's a question of the difference between a finite mind's point of view and an infinite mind's point of view. That, in a sense, we could. Let's just run with it. I know, but maybe we're talking from different points. Perhaps you could say that the one is good, but our sense of good from a finite point of view has to be knowable. So this is good, that is bad. So there has to be able to distinguish. So God is not good in that sense because God is not a finite contingent being. So God equally does not exist in the sense of, look, here's God, like that thing, like God has a thingness to. But God also at another level, sort of in a sense we could say exists, but not if you mean by that like this mug exists,
yeah,
you know. So maybe we could think of like light. There could just be light or just the good, but it's not knowable from a finite perspective until you've also then got
yeah,
something to contrast it with.
hmm
I don't know. That's the way I sort of get my
yeah,
head around what you're saying in a way.
yeah.
So
No, I think
put
that's
it
it. That
together, you know.
yeah, that resonates with me for sure.
Yeah.
And I think yeah, and so God has placed good and evil in the world, and not that I need the scriptures to justify things because I don't, but the scriptures do often say, you know, that God has created good and evil, dark and light, and things like that, right? That the both are within the hand of God, um, and that I think if you come up with any theodicy that's successful,
Yeah.
then it's immediately defeated itself because it's created something other than God. Um, my brain is farting. I'm sorry. We were talking about. We were
Well, yeah.
get me started again.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering. I wonder if like
I'm the worst interviewer ever. I never even know
yeah,
what I'm talking about.
like I
Um,
wonder like the Bible might use the language of like God creates evil or what have you, or and creates good, and
mhm,
to some extent, but that language is fairly anthropomorphic in a way.
yes.
Um, but I wonder if it's more a case of just as soon as you step out from infinite mind, of which we are emanations, our mind is a emanation of, so at source, we would probably both agree we are in the, we are that,
Yeah,
right?
I
So,
agree.
but
Yeah.
in this finite expression,
Mhm,
because of finitude, there must be somewhere something appears to stop and appears to start. Therefore, it's not so much that the sort of God goes, here's some evil, create some evil. It's more just like it's inevitable that things will appear without all the infinitude
mhm,
of the good as soon as you have, like, I don't know, let's say I have a huge canvas, an infinite canvas, and I put nothing on it. There's only white canvas. It's all good. But as soon as I commit um, graphic, my carbon pen or what have you to the page, I have then created some finitude.
mhm,
So something that is this, not that, in its fullness. But the actual canvas itself is untouched in a way.
mhm. Yeah, it still exists underneath the mark
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a whole white canvas. Yeah,
Perception of it
yeah.
is now in its knowability. There's a
Yeah.
patch here that is. I don't know if I'm getting
Yeah.
making any sense.
No, I think you are, and I think I caught what I was trying to say before. Maybe we're in such abstract territory that it's impossible to not
Yeah,
stumble on our words as we try and discern the nature of reality and God. But I was thinking about. I remembered it was about why do we call God good if God is not good. First off, I don't think God is evil because
no,
evil would also be a finite thing, which God cannot be. So
yeah,
to say God is not good is not to say God is evil. Certainly,
yeah. You're
God is
saying God
neither
is
neither
above
good.
these categories.
Yeah, yeah, it's a category error. But then I also believe, and this is I get from Eriugena, I think. But when we observe good and evil through our rational discourse, and I think we're already on the same page about this, that we can say that they exist, that there is good and that there is evil, whether it's a privation or whatever it is. There's something out there that's yucky, and that the good is larger than it, and because the good is better than the evil, because good is better, we know that God desires us towards the good, and therefore God desires the good in some sense. Desire is the wrong word because all words are wrong for when we're talking about there, but there is some way in which God has made the world as such that good is better than evil. That we are oriented towards the good. God can make anything anyway. It could have been that we were oriented towards everything was oriented towards chaos, but it's not. It's oriented towards harmony and goodness and fulfillment and goodness. And that fact alone tells us that God has a character of goodness in some sense, desires us to be good, has a desire for the good, has a character of goodness, which we observe secondhand through the nature of the universe and give names like desire, but isn't actually a desire. But if that made sense. And so we can call God good because good is better. Like we wouldn't call God evil because God has created the relationship between good and evil in such a way that good is obviously preferable.
Yeah.
But
Even the problem with evil itself seems to, if I've got a very good friend, long-term friend of who's well, probably more an agnostic than an atheist, but he's done quite a lot on the internet and YouTube and stuff. As an atheist, and one of the things I've often pointed out is like maybe there's no sort of quick fix solution to the problem of evil and any kind of theodicy, quite likely. But there's always what a lot of people don't consider is what we might call the problem of the good. Like to even posit the idea of evil is like positing shadows. Well, if you as soon as you posit shadows, well, you're like, well, but then I need to posit light, and not in a symmetrical way either. Not or a symbiotic way. Like the shadows are I guess Thomas Aquinas would think of it as the sort of pair accidens, the sort of falling out of what is not fully in the light. So the shadows point to there being a pole star of, which is I think what you're kind of almost getting at, isn't it?
yeah,
The pole star of, it's the moral index and compass of, maybe not even moral, that can be misunderstood, but it's the virtue value index of reality. If as soon as you posit evil as a real, you are saying there's the fabric of reality has moral value shot through it, which points towards an ultimate index of the good being the primary judgment point of all things.
yeah, I agree with that. That even though I wouldn't say God is good, I would say that the good, the beautiful, the true are the primary goals of reality and that towards which we are oriented. And I would even say that they are Christ, accurate descriptions of the intelligible God of Christ. And but not because there are no accurate descriptions of the unintelligible God, of the ineffable God. But because Christ is good, we know that God, in some sense, can be said to be good in some way. But yeah, God creates the shadows with the light. I mean, to say that God couldn't create light without shadows is to place a limit on God. To say God can't do that is to say that there is an order of logic which is prior to God. So I get hung up when people will say like, oh, well, God can't create good without there being evil. How would he do that? It's like, well, I don't know how he would do it, but he would. Right? Otherwise, there's, like I said, a higher ontological order which is determining what God can and cannot do. And so if you believe God could create in any way, then certainly God could create a world which is all good and there's no suffering. And God has chosen not to create that world for some reason, and to create another world which either God created with evil in it or God created in such a way that it could fall and develop evil without preventing the evil, which is the same as creating the evil. Um,
Mm. Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and so for me, I as hard as it is, I try to accept that evil is part of God's plan, that all things work towards the good, as Paul says, in ways that are mysterious and beyond our understanding, but that
mm,
I actually wrote an essay, the first essay in my exchange with Jesse, where I was critiquing a quote from DBH where he was talking about Paul's understanding of the fallen archons, and I dared to sort of write a rebuttal about it, saying that Paul obviously does believe in fallen archons, but there's no reason to think that Paul uses this as a theodicy or as an explanation for why God would allow evil. It's just part of the world God has made. It's part of the heavens that God made, is that it includes angels who can fall and do fall.
yeah,
And that our job is to overcome that evil and to pursue the good. And that's how God has
yeah.
placed us.
I mean, it's
But
interesting, isn't it? Because although DVH kind of dislikes theodicies, if you think of what he says in terms of, for example, like I don't know if you've read that All Shall Be Saved.
I
He,
haven't. I have it on my shelf, and I've listened to it a little bit in the car on my
yeah,
audiobook. But
I mean, forgetting the kind of Christian focus maybe of
sure.
it, because it goes beyond that.
Oh yeah.
He's really making an argument there that obviously against those people that believe in, say, an eternal conscious hell, or even just even an annihilationism. That it's one thing to have a theodicy. Um, let's get this right. We might find theodicies generally quite inadequate at some level, but if you posit a a God who creates and brings into being a reality that in advance, I know we're using time language here, the final sum of the product of that is known to be eternal suffering or evil. Uh, that is to commission from the beginning that kind of in fact, a worse state of reality, because if God just exists just as God, you've only got the good in whichever way you and I want to. I know you might hash that out differently. You've made things worse in a way. Um, so to so he must believe. So he doesn't believe that. He says, that reality must be get to the point of all God being all in all.
Mhm.
Um, so he must believe in a sense that evil is not only does not have the last word, it is fully and finally brought to nothing,
Mhm.
or filled with goodness, I imagine. He must do I think
Mhm.
to be able to write that book.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the idea of
Because he just says something like, if we allow, even just a hell of one person, let's say Judas in hell forever or something like that, um, that God is never all in all, and that there's always some kind of dark, pokey corner of the cosmos where Christ has failed and God has failed, and that the victory is not in place.
mm,
Um, and actually, I loved this argument. He says, bit of a spoiler, if that was the price at which creation had to happen, let's say just Judas in hell, then Judas, in a sense, becomes the savior of all humanity, because he is the means to which that end happens, that everybody else
mm,
gets saved. uh, which kind of is quite perverse. It sort of reverses the
mm,
gospel story quite radically.
mm. Yeah, well,
Um, yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was, yeah,
Yeah, I'll have to go in a few minutes. This has been a long and
yeah,
wonderful chat. Um, but it made me think of of the question of like, is the universe going to one day be saved? You know, will material reality be changed as such that the lion lays down with the lamb, whatever that looks like in practical terms? And in a sort of my skeptical secular mind wants to say I have no idea how that makes any sense. I don't know what that would mean in terms of even the metaphysics, my religious metaphysics. I don't understand how that would all work. I think creation exists eternally in God. The idea that creation would be undone somehow and just everything goes back to God and creation never existed, which is kind of one of those procession and return models, um, is wacky to me because the only outcome of that then is that Earth is useless and
Yeah,
pointless and God is wasting her time,
yeah,
I guess, or her lack of time, or whatever you want to say. And so I think, creation must have a purpose, and that purpose must be good. And I don't think that anything can thwart God's intentions. And so I don't believe that there are fallen angels who go against the will of God. I think that there are fallen angels who work for God as stumbling blocks to help us grow and learn and become and desire the good. Just as in a painting, you need dark. If it's all light colors, it's not beautiful. You need dark to accentuate and to help guide the eye towards what you need it to look at. Um, and because I don't think God is the good, I don't have to think that the good is unified in itself. I think the good, by definition, is opposed to the evil, and is not unity. It's not a unified thing. It's a part of the multiplicity, not the unity.
wow, that will come full circle.
Yeah,
That sounds like there's more to explore there, but maybe
yeah.
we
I'm
have to
sure we
go
could.
and
I'd love to sometime. If you want to
yeah,
have another chat, we can do it sometime for sure.
sure, yeah. But that
Yeah,
sounds like a good cliffhanger.
yeah.
But,
Well, it's
but
been lovely to chat with you for the last almost 2 hours.
yeah,
Um, and I hope
likewise.
we do it again sometime. I've got to go check on my kids and make sure that the teenager is still caring well for the toddler,
Still alive. Yeah.
which I'm sure he is, but it's my time to check in.
Yeah.
So
Cool, John.
I'll, yeah, we'll be in touch. You take
Thanks
care,
for
my
that.
friend.
Brilliant. Enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, me too. All right.
All right.
Cheers.
You take care. Bye.